I would like to call to order the joint meeting of the Glendale City Council and the Glendale Housing Authority for May 3rd, 2011. May we have roll call for council, please?
Council members Manukian.
Here.
Caro.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
Mayor Friedman. Mayor Pro Tem Najarian.
Here.
May we have a roll call for the Housing Authority?
Authority members Friedman, Manukian,
Here.
Vinci,
Here.
Najarian,
Here.
Parazian,
Here.
Weaver,
Here.
Chair Quintero.
Here.
May we have your report, please?
The agenda for the May 3rd, 2011 joint public meeting of the Glendale City Council and the Glendale Housing Authority was posted on Thursday, April 28th, 2011 on the bulletin board outside City Hall. Before you today is Director of Community Services and Parks regarding proposed annual action plan for Community Development Block Grant CDBG Emergency Shelter Grant ESG and Home Investment Partnership Act home programs for fiscal year 2011-2012. 1A is Council Resolution adopting a negative declaration for the fiscal year 2011-2012 CDBG, ESG, and Home Annual Action Plan. At B is a council motion approving the annual action plan and authorizing submission to the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. And at C is a council resolution appropriating $997,000 allocated to the Maryland Avenue Park project to the Carr and Maple Park upgrades project.
Thank you. Jess Duran.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Najarian, members of the City Council, Chairman Quintero, members of the Housing Authority. Before I begin my introductory comments, I do want to recognize the CDBG Advisory Committee. We have 4 of the 5 members here in attendance. We have Ramela Markarian. We have Zare Sananian, who is the current chair. We have Gary Cornell, who is the current vice chair, and John Sad of the CDBG Advisory Committee. And they work very, very hard at developing their funding recommendations. It is not an easy task. It is a challenge. This year it was made especially difficult because they had to do it twice. First time based on our original estimate of the funding that we were expecting to receive from HUD, and the second time after the U.S. Congress and the President revised the federal budget and reduced the CDBG program. So I wanted to recognize the committee, and they, of course, are available to answer any questions that you might have of them regarding their thought process in developing their funding recommendations. And I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Moises Carrillo, who will walk you through the slide presentation, but I did want to make some introductory comments. As you know, we've been doing this for a long time. This is the 37th year of the CDBG program. But each year, the city receives an allocation of approximately $6 million from the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development to address community development, economic development, homeless, and housing needs in our community. These particular funds come to our community in the form of the Community Development Block Grant Program, the Emergency Shelter Grant Program, and the Home Program, and we are responsible for developing an annual action plan for the use of these funds. In developing the plan, our focus is always on the CDBG program because it's the largest entitlement, it has the most flexibility in its use, it has the greatest demand by the community, and involves the greatest amount of community participation. To that end, every year in collaboration with the CDBG Advisory Committee, the city performs a level of community needs assessment to reaffirm our program and our funding priorities. At the same time, staff receives input from HUD, the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development, and estimates the amount of funds the city will receive, since jurisdictions typically will not receive their official award letters until March or April. So every year it's based on an estimate from HUD. Based on this estimate, staff and the committee develop a proposed funding allocation plan by funding category. Then the program priorities in that funding allocation plan are submitted to the City Council and the Housing Authority for approval. This year that approval occurred on November 16th, at which time the City Council and the Housing Authority authorized us to go ahead and issue an RFP to the community, which we did. Funding proposals were received, evaluated, and deliberated by the CDBG Advisory Committee, and the committee developed their funding recommendations on February 28th and March 5th, 2011. Subsequently, we held a public hearing per the federal guidelines on those recommendations, and we were set to present those recommendations to the City Council on April 19th. However, as I mentioned earlier, on April 8th, the U.S. Congress and the President approved a revised federal budget and reduced CDBG funding by 16.4%, which was significant. Therefore, on April 21st, the CDBG Advisory Committee reconvened and developed revised funding recommendations, which are now the recommendations that you have before you. In addition to requesting approval of the fiscal year 11-12 CDBG annual plan, staff is also requesting to transfer $997,000 in fiscal year 10-11 CDBG funds that were allocated to the Maryland Avenue Park to a new car and Maple Park upgrades project. In November 2010...
Or a new car?
No, a car park.
Car park. It's not an automobile we're talking about.
It's not an automobile. We learned in November 2010 that the city was awarded State Prop 84 funds for the Maryland Avenue project, which freed up the CDBG funds that were also allocated to that project. So they're now available for reprogramming, and since these funds were pre-designated for a park project, it is recommended that the funds remain as such and be reprogrammed to another very high priority, which is park upgrades at Carr Park and at Maple Park. In view of this, we've also included in our report a discussion of the CDBG CIP priorities for the City Council and Housing Authority to consider. With that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mr. Carrillo, and he can walk through the slide presentation.
Yes. One question. If you were to estimate, how many hours do you think the committee members spent during the course of a year to get to this point? How many hours do you think they put in? They have to visit, they have to do hearings, homework. About how much do you think? How many hours?
Well, they have to sift through approximately 25 funding proposals. Their packet is about this high. They conduct site visits. They receive quarterly performance reports. They conduct interviews, which is like a job interview, about a 15 to 20 interview for each agency. I would guess, and they probably do it on the weekends because I think they'll also have full-time jobs or businesses, but I would guess, 20, 30 hours?
That's the ballpark.
About 20 or 30 hours studying the funding proposals in order to intelligently evaluate and ask questions and deliberate and develop funding recommendations. And I have to tell you, the current chemistry of this particular board is outstanding. If you've had a chance to watch the meetings, you know what I'm talking about. And the diversity of their expertise, we couldn't ask for anything more. We have an architect, we have an accountant, we have a hospital administrator, we have an attorney, and we have a homeowners activist on the committee, and they do a great job.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem Najarian, Housing Authority members, Chairman Quintero, City Council members. Just summarized quite a bit of what I was going to say, but I'll go through these slides just in general so that we have some specifics on how the CDBG funding plan and also the other HUD programs were developed. Slide. As just mentioned, we have 3 items to cover today. It's the negative deck for the CEQA certification declaration, the approval of the fiscal year 2011-2012, CDBG, ESG, and Home Annual Action Plan, and approval of a resolution to appropriate and transfer $997,000 from the Maryland Avenue Mini Park project to a new Carr and Maple Park upgrade project. Slide. Just mentioned that we had some challenges this year. In April 2011, the federal government had really drastically reduced all the federal entitlement programs, including the HUD programs and many other programs like Head Start and other social service programs. On that green section there, you'll see the highlight of the funding cuts that were made to the CDBG Home but not the ESG program. The significance of that is a 16.4% reduction in CDBG, which we had not anticipated this year. We also have a 12.2% decrease in home funding from what had been allocated from 2010-11. Besides the significant dollar amounts in funding reductions, this also significantly impacted the social service programs, which caused the advisory committee to meet again. That certainly is an impact to the agencies who already have seen cutbacks in public and private funding. So certainly another cut in CDBG really impacts those social service programs and the residents that they serve. Next slide. Just did mention the advisory committee members, and certainly we as staff appreciate the efforts, and I know it's more than 20 hours just that weekend alone. It's over probably 100 hours total for the advisory committee members to do site visits for 16 different projects, provide guidance for staff, very good, solid recommendations from all the advisory committee members, and certainly the leadership there is significant for staff since it helps us manage a better CDBG program. So we really, from staff, appreciate the advisory committee members. Even their questions that come up at whatever hour, we certainly do appreciate their input.
Question. You said over 100 hours?
I would say in total, when you add up all the meetings for
Just was
the...
saying like 25, 30. So 100 sounds more appropriate.
Councilmember Weaver, yeah, I mean, I would say in total, and if, unless they disagree, they attend public hearings, they attend our community events, they certainly attend the meetings, the site visits. I think 20 hours alone is just on the proposals that are submitted by the community agencies and city departments alone, but it is a lot of hours. Just want to go through the plan process very briefly and know that we certainly had an extensive needs assessment process last year with the development of the 5-year consolidated plan, and that involved about 1,300 residents giving input through surveys, community meetings. That was back in 2010. This year we had a little bit of less participation since the effort was made a year ago, and we still had about 235 residents come to our meetings, fill out surveys, and provide input into those findings. Those were developed into the program priorities that were established by Council last November 2010, which led to development of the RFP for the CDBG and ESG programs. The committee, again, as we mentioned before, did spend a significant amount of time in reviewing these proposals and making those recommendations back in February and March 2011. There was a public hearing on those recommendations on March 24th, where we had the public come in and provide comment on the recommendations. At this point, we are with City Council Housing Authority review and approval of the annual action plan. I did want to say that certainly staff has provided a significant amount of time and effort to get to this point. Staff did review all the proposals that you see here from the agencies and the city departments and provided really the background and the reports needed for the advisory committee to make their funding decisions. But you'll see here the results of the CDBG RFP process. We received 24 proposals. 19 proposals were recommended for funding. We had a request of $1.1 million in CDBG social service funding, and only after, again, our funding cuts, $446,000 was available for the social service programs. That's really a significant cut, about $88,000 from what we had previously last year, and that usually amounts to about 4 projects, 4 CDBG projects. The agencies did certainly receive the bulk of the funding from the CDBG social service projects. Over 80% is provided to community agencies that serve low and moderate income persons, and the city has a few programs that are also geared towards low and moderate income persons. Next slide. The capital improvement projects were We're also impacted by the funding cuts. We did receive 5 proposals from the community agencies, from nonprofits. 5 pre-designated projects were approved earlier by the City Council back in November as part of our program planning process. A total of 10 proposals were in the CIP category. The number of proposals that were recommended were 9. That did include, actually did include 5 other community agency, 4 community agency projects. 1 department project was not funded. We did have to make a cut in one of our CIP projects, which amounted to $297,000, and that was for the Pacific Park artificial turf project, which helped balance out the CIP program for CDBG and help keep the community agencies' funding intact. So that was really the only other change we made, or the committee made, as far as recommendations to the CDBG plan. Next slide. The next slides are just going to give a summary of the CDBG action plan, the annual plan, and the funding amounts. The summary of the CDBG funding plan is as follows. We, after, again, our reduction in funding, we have about $3.3 million in CDBG funding. It balanced out to $595,000 for our administration, which is a cut from $712,000 from the current year. Social services, again, $446,000 for 13 community projects and 6 city projects. The capital improvement projects at $2.3 million, including 4 community projects and 5 city projects, again, including those 5 pre-designated projects. Again, this balanced out the funding availability. Again, the significant impacts we will see in the coming year is the social service projects, where we had previously $534,000 available, now it's only $446,000. I did want to point out the exhibits do have the list of funds requested, recommended, and the difference between the current funding and the recommended funding, and that again show the difference between the funding that was provided in 2010 for social services and what's currently being recommended. The Exhibit 3 in your packet does have the descriptions of all the projects, does have the only the approved projects, but again, it'll give you an idea of what was being proposed by the committee and provided to the City Council. I did want to have one more handout that we could share with you as far as the what was approved by the committee as far as the recommendation for social service programs, and that's basically a summary of the recommendations, including what was recommended, and then what was revised as far as the funding recommendation after the approval of the first round. Again, back in April, they met again and made some other very difficult decisions, and I know that the committee had really challenged themselves to come up with a criteria for making those additional funding cuts to the agencies. The first criteria they used was that they would have to balance it out by not funding any new projects from that were added to the fiscal year 11-12 year. And you'll see that again in handout number 1. The second is to not increase funding, which had been allocated to a few projects, 3 projects, for the CDBG social service programs, to bring them back down to a level of 2010-11. And third, to cut approximately 5% off each additional project to make the balance come out to $446,000. I know that was very difficult, challenging again for the committee, but they certainly, from our staff point of view, did some very good, a very good method of making changes to the funding allocations. I don't know if there are any questions on this part here yet, but next slide. Jess did mention that in addition to the CDBG and ESG and Home Action Plan, we also have a Maryland Avenue project that we're transferring funds to a new Maple Park and Car Park project. Just to note that several years ago, we did have council direction as far as any expressed CIP priorities for CDBG to use the CDBG funds for pre-designated projects. The council also expressed that park development and park improvements one of the city's highest priorities, and for the use of CDBG funds, and then we should allocate $1 million to $1.5 million in CDBG CIP funds toward a park project every year. I would say this is also substantiated by the recommendations that we receive from the community residents, from our surveys, from our community meetings at parks and open space, especially in the target area of CDBG, which is Southern Glendale, is one of the residents' highest needs. And certainly we've had success in providing CDBG funds in the past for other Southern Glendale park projects. Next slide. The criteria that we use for identifying CDBG park projects is that, again, they have to be located in a Southern Glendale eligible target area, again, south of Broadway. And that projects that can be planned and completed quickly, projects in dense neighborhoods, and certainly the neighborhoods east of Glendale, south of Colorado, are certainly some of our multifamily areas that are certainly targeted for CDBG and for park improvements. Projects that address, again, public safety, security, substandard or long-term maintenance issues, and projects that complement existing CIP funded projects and master plans. Again, also the acquisition of any property for expansion of existing parks, certainly a priority criteria for the CDBG funding for parks. Based on the criteria, we listed some priorities for the CDBG, and these are pretty much in our priority order for the CDBG program, and especially as you see the funding recommendations today. The Pacific Park Artificial Turf Project, which is recommended for funding for 11-12, and the Maple Park upgrades and Car Park upgrade projects. Those are two Southern Glendale projects that are highly used parks. Maple Park certainly has a new building coming up, but certainly the other improvements for that park will certainly complement the CIP funds, and actually it's state bond funds that are going into that park. Car Park is another highly utilized park that hasn't had significant improvements in a long time. Those are the three projects that we're discussing today for CIP improvements. Again, the rest of the projects are listed in priority and are the projects that we will look forward to in the future. Next slide. So I just want to briefly again summarize the CDBG funding plan. It was a longer process this year. We did not expect certainly significant funding reductions this year. We trust and hope that funding levels will remain the same for the next fiscal year, or actually a little bit more, we hope. But it's hard to say at this point where the additional 2012 funding cuts may come from. But at this point, available for any questions and answers for the CDBG funding plan.
Okay, are there any questions on the presentation or any other? Very good.
Thank you.
Actually, no. Questions at this point.
Okay. We do have recommendations.
Some motions?
And I just have a couple things that I would be remiss if I didn't bring up. The Pacific Park Artificial Turf Project. I know during the last campaign, one of the claims of the Measure S campaign was that they were going to put artificial turf fields on facilities. So were they thinking of Pacific Park? Because if they would, I would invite them to pay for the Pacific Park turf project, and we could put that money into some of the other projects.
Yeah.
What's the deal? And whose park is that anyway? I mean, that actual field, who does that belong to?
Belongs to the Councilman Najarian. That field is on the school's property. We have joint use of it so our use is on the weekends and evenings. We just learned earlier today that is actually on their list for Measure S. We were not aware of that.
Aha.
So this money could stay at Pacific and take care of the playground, the restroom buildings, the plaza greening, as opposed to doing that field. But we just learned that a few hours ago.
So the committee hasn't been given a chance to
We were unaware of
discuss how that could otherwise be reprogrammed.
Right, right.
I mean, I would applaud the school district if that was one of theirs. Is there a time
I understand
frame?
it's high on their list as a priority.
That is great.
That's what I'm told.
Thank you to everyone who voted for Measure S.
You're welcome.
Not you, Mr. Ahern. I'm talking to the people out there.
Well, hey, shouldn't disclose
Mr.
how I
Starbird,
voted.
what do you think about that?
One thing about Mr. Ahern having voted for me.
I mean, this
Yeah.
this topic.
I think we should take it up with the district. I'd asked the same question this afternoon, wondering we may have other projects that could be impacted by Measure S, and certainly if their bond proceeds address this project, then we should readdress the status.
It'd be good to discuss that with them.
I completely
and
agree.
Sort of get
Yeah,
back.
I completely
Because
agree.
I presume that we're going to let them use the pool.
They will. It's in our joint use agreement. They'll have use of the pool.
So we've got some room for negotiation, I'm sure, in making that.
My understanding from the principal of that school is that field is a priority for them to fund under Measure S.
So we'll have time for you to have the discussions with the school board and have our
I think on this
CDBG.
component in particular, you should hold up action on this component until we've explored that. We can come back to you at a later time with the resolution of that, and then you may want to have, let's assume the district says, oh yes, it's Measure S, then we can refer the matter back to the committee for reallocation.
And we have enough time, right? We have enough time to do that.
But my concern there would be, how long is it going to take the school district to get it together? I mean, if you drive by there, and I go there on a regular basis, they're basically they're playing in dirt or mud when it rains, and I've actually had the parents of some kids who have pulled their kids from the league that they're playing in because of the dirt and all kinds of issues. So could we get into a situation where we would build it and then they could reimburse us?
We can certainly bring that up with
Yeah, I'd like to bring that up. I just don't want this. It's on their top priority. That could be 3 years from now. In the meantime, the kids there in South Glendale are playing in dirt. So let's see what we can...
I don't know what the timing is for their first issuance of their bonds. My guess is sometime this year, but that could take a while depending on rates and availability and all that in the market. So we can certainly have that conversation with them if that's what you desire.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're efficient turf builders, right? Turf layers. So maybe our Parks and Rec could get the job done and then be reimbursed by the school
6
district.
months.
Mr. Ahern gets the job done.
Yep.
Is that your bailiwick or fields, or are you just aquatics builder, pool builder?
The park staff does it all, sir.
Okay. So, Knight of the Sword, or what do you guys call that? The
Do it all.
Order of the Sword, right? The hardworking Parks Department. Okay, so that's an issue. Are there any other questions or issues that anyone?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. If we'd known that earlier, we could have pulled this item, at least for a week, so we're out. That's
terms of-
170,000
But
bucks.
we're not suggesting you hold on the balance of the report just on this one item.
Yeah, but that category.
Pardon?
Well, forget it.
Yeah, just on that line item.
That line item. Right.
Mr.
understand.
Quintero.
In terms of the PAL program, the Police Athletic League, I noticed that they took a very big hit from their current funding of $31,000 down to $13,000. Then the STAR program went from 19 to 16.2. But PAL, the $13,000, I assume, is not for police salaries, et cetera. It's strictly for program issues. I mean, how does that work?
Yes, Chairman Quintero, yes, there is a a reduction in the Pell program, and that does pay for the, not for police, but for support staff, and I believe this one is for the boxing coach trainer. And I think what the committee also looks at is the expenditure rates of projects, programs, activities, numbers served, and certainly our departments have to weigh as much as the social service agencies, and fortunately the Pell program had less participation this year, so there was a cut, and primarily again to balance out the social service programs. So that was
So PAL at this point is the boxing program and also the horse, or is that the
equestrian.
Equestrian
yes.
and boxing are both in PAL.
Yes.
Yeah, speaking of PAL, Councilmember Quintero and City Clerk Kasakian and myself, as well as some others, got a chance to go down into the basement of the police building and saw those. I'm sorry, what did I say?
Chuck Quintero.
I'm sorry.
He wasn't there.
Councilmember Manukian. And did I call him Kasakian? Or did
Yes,
I
you did.
call
You got
him
my
Tweet
name right.
or something? The city clerk, Kasakian, and I were down and saw firsthand, and I'm sorry to hear that.
Awful small facility. It's
It's a little claustrophobic, but the coach there seems to be very committed and really tries to instill some of the values in those kids of hard work. And they were down there hitting the speed bag and the big bag, and they took a swing at Councilmember Manukian. I had to hold one of them back. But
thank God they missed.
no, it's a good group of kids, and
Without question, it's been one of the most successful programs, including so many of these kids that I've gotten to know over the years who are no longer kids, who've gone on to colleges. One of them became a world champion, who's now in law school, et cetera, et cetera. So I want to make sure we keep nurturing, because they obviously are working with those kids that are the most aggressive, the most likely to want to do something other than box. So the idea is to get them to spend all their energy in the gym, the discipline. You certainly can't be getting high and doing things if you're getting in a boxing ring with someone who's determined to beat you. So anyway, well, hopefully this will be enough money and they're going to be able to move forward with it.
okay. So, Mr. Weaver, were you on the verge of making
What kind of motions do we have? A council
I was
or
on the
house?
way
It's
to-
council. It's a council motion.
Council motion?
So we can move 1A, egg deck,
That has to be separate.
and,
Right,
okay,
the next-
They
that's
can go
right.
at the same time. They can go, as long as they go concurrently. I'm okay with
That
that.
and 1C, is it? Go?
Would you like to make a motion on 1A and 1C, and then on 1B,
Yes.
just revise the motion?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, is there a second to 1A and 1C?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Council members Manukian,
Yes.
Quintero,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Mayor Friedman, Mayor Pro Tem Najarian.
Yes. Mr. Weaver.
Well, on 1B, we're doing it, how are we going to handle that? Are we going to,
Subject to
Stand.
discussions with the board.
are we giving direction or taking off calendar or?
No, you take action on it. The item would remain in the plan, but if it's not necessary, then it would be like
Okay,
other allocations.
subject to
would be
further
realloc-
discussion with
Yes,
the school
subject to
district.
clarification with the district on the need for it.
Right.
Is
That's
there a
it.
second to that?
Second.
Roll call, please.
Council members Manukian,
Yes.
Quintero,
Yes.
Weaver,
Aye.
Mayor Friedman, Mayor Pro Tem Najarian.
Yes. Thank you to the CDBG committee for working hard and staff for dealing with a shrinking CDBG budget. And let's hope it's better next year. Thank you. Is there a motion to adjourn for council?
So moved.
Motion to adjourn for the Housing Authority.
Second. We're
We're
adjourned.
adjourned.